Good evening and welcome to this very special 5x15 event with Lucy Jones and Amy Liptrot. Lucy and Amy are no strangers to 5x15's virtual stage. Last spring, we were delighted to host them both for an online conversation about Amy's acclaimed and best-selling book, The Instant, the follow-up to the hugely successful The Outrun. And now they are both here together again to talk about Lucy's new book, Matrescence, on the metamorphosis of pregnancy, childbirth, and early motherhood. The book is a groundbreaking, urgent, and deeply personal investigation into the emerging concept of matrescence, a recognition that pregnancy, childbirth, and early motherhood marks a period of far-reaching physiological, psychological, and social transformation. The book was published just last week and has had some amazing reviews already. Writing in The Observer, Jude Rogers said that it's, quote, the best book I've ever read about motherhood, bloody and alive, roaring and ready to change conversations. Naturally, we can't wait to hear more about the book, but let me introduce both of our speakers first. Lucy Jones is a writer and journalist. She previously worked at the NME and the Daily Telegraph, and her writing on culture, science, and nature has been published widely in GQ, BBC Wildlife, The Sunday Times, The Guardian, and The New Statesman. Her best-selling book, Losing Eden, was a Times and Telegraph Book of the Year in 2020. Tonight, Lucy will be in conversation with Amy Liptrot, author of the Sunday Times bestsellers The Outrun and The Instant, which was shortlisted for the Wainwright Prize for Nature Writing. Amy also writes columns and reviews for various magazines and newspapers, including The Guardian and The Spectator. We're so excited to have them both with us. Amy and Lucy will be in conversation for around 45 minutes tonight, and there will be 15 minutes or so at the end to get your audience questions. So please do post them in the Q&A box at any time during the event, and we'll get to as many as we can. The lovely Newham Books will be selling copies of Matrescence and both of our speakers' books tonight. All the information about how to order those will be posted in the chat. Without any further ado, Lucy, Amy, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so pleased to be talking to Lucy Jones. I love her writing, and The Nature Seed and Losing Eden are both really important books for me. Lucy and I first met years ago in an AA meeting, and now we have similar age children and are writing about similar territories often. I read Matrescence in one intense day, underlining masses and just feeling really stimulated. It's brilliantly researched and argued, experimental with form and genre, and just really exciting writing. And I think we're going to start with Lucy reading a bit from the beginning of the book.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Amy and Jack. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here with you all. Yeah, I'm going to read a little bit from the introduction. When a human animal grew inside my body, I started to realize that some hoodwinking had been going on. When she left my body, I noticed more. Pregnancy, then birth, and then, big time, early motherhood simply did not match up with the cultural, social, and philosophical narratives I had grown up with. What I felt and saw did not accord with what I had been taught about women and men, fathers and mothers. I could not connect my present experience with what I had so far absorbed about the body, the mind, the individual and relational self, and our collective structures of living. At first, I thought that I must be going mad. I searched desperately for ways of understanding what was happening to me. I started to realize that my mind had been colonized by inadequate ideas about womanhood, about motherhood, about value, even love. There was canker in the roots of my habitat. A sense that I had been fundamentally misinformed about the female body and maternal experience set in fast. The first day that I felt nauseous, 5 weeks or so pregnant, I was excited. Morning sickness was a sign of a healthy pregnancy, I had read, and it confirmed to me what had seemed so mysterious and diffuse, that inside me was the child I had always dreamed of, finally. When it came, the nausea was immediately severe, but I figured, well, let's see. The morning is around 4 hours of the day, not even a quarter of my waking hours. I can deal with that. I nibbled ginger biscuits and took sips of water. Then noon came around. Severe nausea persisted. 3 p.m, still there. 6 p.m, what? 8 p.m, How? 10 p.m, it remained. Then, like this, the next day, and the next, and the next, and the next, all day, every day, for 5 months. Meanwhile, a parallel, more disquieting change seemed to be happening in my mind. I was overjoyed to be pregnant, attached to the growing creature within, but I found myself becoming subdued, more introverted, increasingly disrupted as the weeks passed. I had no language with which to understand or describe this change, but my consciousness felt different, restructured, or rewired. This freaked me out. It was as if someone else had moved in, making a home in both my uterus and my brain. I thought I must be imagining it. I had understood pregnancy to be a relatively straightforward physical process, with a few hormonal days here and there. I thought the baby would grow inside my body as in a flower pot, that I would still be the same person, but that didn't seem to be the case. In the hours, weeks, and months that followed the birth, I grew more and more alienated, frustrated by the lack of language to articulate the reality of childbirth. I had always believed in the power of words, but here they failed me. No one was talking about pain, about birth as an emotional process, about how it felt to have grown another human, to be two people at the same time, and then to be vacated, to push a person into being. I knew nothing about the emotional and psychological transition that follows birth. I had no idea that something was happening to my brain, that it was literally changing shape. I had no idea what was coming, the anxiety, the life-exploding romance, the guilt, the transcendence, the terror, the psychedelia, the loss of control, the rupture of self.
Thank you so much, setting out some of the questions that you go on to answer. Starting with the title, what is this word matrescence and what does it mean to you?
So the word matrescence, it's very similar to adolescence, and you kind of pronounce it's kind of similar if you think of it like that. So the word, I first came across the word when my first child was about 9 months old, and I was quite blindsided by the experience and felt just very kind of, strange and different. But I thought that there was something wrong with me and that I was probably imagining it. And then I read this article in the New York Times, and a reproductive psychiatrist called Alexandra Sachs mentioned this word matrescence. And I ordered the book where the word was first cited, which was a essay collection, it's on my other bookshelf, from the 1970s. And the word matrescence was first used by the late American anthropologist Dana Raphael in an essay about how in most other cultures and societies in the world, becoming a mother is seen as a significant developmental stage, even a kind of life crisis for women. So Dana Raphael talks about the Tikopia people who have a sense of the newborn mother as well as the newborn baby. And she wrote about how the process of becoming a mother is a physical change, yes, but it's also a psychological, emotional, existential, a change in identity, a change in all your relationships. And lots of academics have kind of built on that idea, and now there's this emerging concept of matrescence as a way of thinking about the changes, which I think are particularly very social as well in terms of our culture and how we think of mothers and women. What it means to me, it was both personally extremely useful and soothing and consoling to feel that this experience that I was having was a thing, and actually a big thing. And secondly, I found it a really kind of creatively and intellectually generative and fertile kind of way of thinking about metamorphosis. Always been interested in kind of change and process and starting again and so on. And yeah, it felt like a kind of useful but really interesting way of exploring more.
found it interesting when you said there are lots of movies and books, coming of age movies about adolescence and young adulthood, but that's not something that we see as a genre for Matrescence.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so like, you know, we all know that adolescents are awkward and having a tricky time, and what I found when my matrescence, my first matrescence, very like an adolescent, very kind of awkward and like I didn't know what to say and kind of strange, but you know, importantly, I felt very alone. Whereas in adolescence, you know, as you just say, we have all the culture, we're together, and you know, we're on your phone all the time, or at least I was in the 90s, and you know, there's all these kind of cultural kind of signifiers, which are kind of rituals and rites in adolescence, and that is what is missing. And additionally, and maybe we'll go on to this, but the new kind of brain science of parenting and the neuroscience of the maternal and parental caregiver brain tells us that the effect on the body of pregnancy, childbirth and early motherhood is as seismic as adolescence. So we're just kind of learning that.
Very understudied.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, for a book about motherhood, you open by talking about slime molds, and you go on to sections about, in between the chapters, about things including tadpoles, eels, volcanoes, sea squirts, the moon. So can you tell me about slime molds? A lot of people won't even know what that is. And also about how these ecological sections relate to the themes of the book.
Yes, sure, I would love to. So firstly, if no one knows what a slime mold looks like, look up Barry Webb's photographs after this this conversation. So slime molds are well, their scientific name is Myxomycetes, and they were thought to be a kind of fungi, but they're not. They're in the kingdom Protista, and they have various different stages of the life cycle. At the beginning, they are what's called a plasmodium. Well, there's lots of different species, but a lot of them start as this kind of blob of kind of slime. It's often yellow. I mean, they are everywhere. I tracked one in the cemetery I live next to in Basingstoke the whole of the winter. You just have to look out for them. Anyway, when they're in this stage, they're more like an animal than anything else. They're kind of predating, moving, scoffing bacteria. They have an intelligence which has been kind of illuminated by experiments in labs. They can solve mazes, they can make decisions, they can kind of teach. Anyway, and then at some point they turn into these sessile, static, spore-releasing organisms, which you're going to have to look them up to really find them, but they are so beautiful. They're absolutely tiny. They're like 1 millimeter high, but they're like every color of the rainbow, iridescent, goblet shaped, egg shaped, nets. It will.
Oh, Lucy, you've frozen. Oops. Lucy, I don't know if Lucy's frozen for other people, but she has for me.
Yes, we'll work on getting her back and connected in just a moment.
Yeah, I really want to find out where I can find these slime molds. And I recommend, I have seen some of Barry Webb's pictures and Lucy's own pictures, which she posts on her Instagram of her slime mold investigations in the woods, I think, near her house. Oh, that's a show. I've got Lucy frozen in mid conversation, and we're trying to get her back. Yeah, so just to remind people that you can submit questions, which we'll do at the end of the session. While we try to get Lucy back, maybe her kids are streaming telly and using up her bandwidth, which would be entirely appropriate for our conversation. Hi, Lucy, are you back with us?
I am very sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah, I can hear and see you fine.
I'm not sure what happened. So I was talking about slime molds.
Yeah.
So the reason I was drawn to them was because they seem to enact a very kind of dramatic, unusual and unexpected metamorphosis, that they kind of started in this way of being this kind of yellow slime, and they turn into these kind of intricate, beautiful spore-releasing organisms. And I'm really interested in hidden things, and also kind of issues of perception and ways of seeing. And I suppose I was thinking a lot at the time about how so much of motherhood felt very hidden to me. My experience of it was really an experience of kind of deception or unmasking, realizing what it takes to sustain human well-being. And in my naivety, I'm ashamed to say I had no idea actually how difficult care work is, and what my mother and my grandmothers had to do to keep us going. So I was kind of interested in these organisms, which were so incredible but so hidden, and also just quite like incredibly beautiful as well, and kind of hopeful. So yeah, the ecological vignettes were there because I wanted the book, even though it is very much about my own personal experience, and it's kind of a lot of memoir, I was wanting it to be also interesting to people who'd been through any change and process and transformation. And I suppose I was trying to kind of bring in those stories to talk about the universal nature of change, and how it's something that we all go through in different ways, and it's also so much in the natural world. And I couldn't really find myself in any films, TV, books, apart from, there was, Rachel Cusk and a few other ones eventually I found. But I couldn't find my experience portrayed or expressed kind of in the culture around me. And that actually where I found it was in the woods, and in the non-human world. And that's where I was kind of felt soothed and part of something.
I'm determined to both find and identify slime molds now, generally on wood or on dead trees.
Yeah, on any kind of organic material, mostly dead wood. You want to be going out on a day where it's rained recently, so they really like kind of moist wood. But I live in a garden in a town, and we have kind of old rotten kind of fence posts and pallets, and I found lots of species, there, that kind of thing. Leaves, anything like that.
Okay, I will report back when I find one. One of the elements in the book that I found most interesting and challenging was your dismantling, or maybe interrogation, of both the natural childbirth movement and the breastfeeding lobby. And you identify maybe similar evolutions of thinking in both areas. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So as I have said, this book is, because I wrote it when I had young children, it's very much focused on my own experience, and my experience of birth and breastfeeding was simply, well, it's not simple, it's always so complex, but I went into birth thinking that it would be fine. And I was very much into kind of hypnobirthing and kind of natural birth ideas, and that was very appealing to me. It's very seductive. It was very, I liked the idea of having choice and autonomy and agency, and it was okay, but it was not what I thought it was going to be. And I know that's, of course, you can never really prepare, but there were certain things that happened in my experience of birth which I would have liked to have had more information about. And I think however people give birth, or whatever happens in birth, that does seem to be quite a common thread, that while there is definitely a need to be sensitive to people who are pregnant and want to have filters up, and that's a really difficult and complex issue. There seemed to be a paucity of information about, for example, birth injuries or latent labour. So I was in labour for a really long time, kind of 40 odd hours, which meant that I kind of missed a couple of nights sleep and started motherhood just very, very, very tired. And the same with breastfeeding. So, we are in this country encouraged to exclusively breastfeed, really wanted to, had never even considered that I wouldn't. I was breastfed, found that actually that there were issues that I had, and that was devastating. And it's something kind of I've worked through, but it was a real sense of failure. But I think the important thing was that again, it was a kind of experience slightly of deception, of not being given all the information that actually, it's not always simple and it's not easy. And maybe we don't live in a society where, there is enough support or places to feed, or, there's only 1% of people exclusively breastfeed in this country, even though, we're told that we must. So that says something, I think, about what's happening. Anyway, you've really pulled me into the most contentious.
Yeah.
I guess what I think the one of the main points I wanted, and the important things that I wanted to do, or areas I wanted to draw attention to by kind of talking about natural childbirth and this idea is kind of question the way we employ ideas of what's natural with women and mothers and around motherhood. I found it interesting that still today there are many taboos around this area. We seem to really want to kind of sacralize birth and motherhood and feeding and so on, and we so want it to work, and I'm sure there's so much which is well intentioned there, but we disavow also the horror and the pain and the blood and the injuries and the what can happen for decades after childbirth. Seems that we're not getting the full picture, and I think that's harmful for women because we don't get the healthcare that we need. And the support. It means that we're all expected after kind of a week or two just to get on our feet and go back, to normal life. Unlike other cultures in the world who have rites and rituals around caring for the newborn mother. But I think there's also a wider issue here in how we think about ourselves in a kind of ecological context and how we situate ourselves in the natural world. And I feel that we're in this climate, ecological, planetary crisis, and that's a failure of ideas and philosophy and thought and sensibility. And it feels to me that we've inherited these kind of post-Enlightenment ideas of nature and us being separated from nature, and trying to kind of dominate it in a quite imperial, kind of colonial way. I will bring in motherhood, don't worry. And we've lost a sense of the sublime or fear or awe or the respect that we actually probably need more of to kind of counter our human supremacy. And I have a feeling that if we could maybe bring the reality of how we all begin life, our natality, into the open a bit more, then there might be a shift in our sensibilities around how we relate to the material world.
Thank you for talking about this and sharing your experience, and they are complex and sensitive issues, but yeah, you are quite strong in the book, and you said in the drive to normalize breastfeeding, the pendulum has swung too far, straying into misinformation and deceit. That was some of your experience, which I found, and you go into detail about the sort of ideas of natural childbirth and how these have been disseminated, and it's really interesting. Everyone should read the book. Yeah, thank you for sharing your own experience. You've worked as a journalist. You are a journalist. How did you find moving into memoir after doing? You've not written so personally before, from journalism.
Yeah. Well, that's never been asked that question before. That's interesting. Well, I think I've always kind of written personally, privately, in my own experiences down, often in kind of terrible poetry. But with, as soon as my daughter was born, I had the kind of impulse that I needed to write everything to make sense of it. And much of that was to try and find the language and the vocabulary, which I still think is very lacking in terms of maternal subjectivity. I could have done this book a different way. I think probably if I'd had longer time, I could have used other kind of case studies or brought in other voices. But there's that thing about how in pregnancy you're like pushed to your limit of your metabolic limit of like basically in pregnancy you're like, you can't get, the human body can't go any further. It's like you're running a marathon basically every day. Kind of felt with this book, doing it with my young kids, all I could really have managed was to get my own story on the page and then bring in research which related to the memoir aspect, and then try and broaden it out so it would be useful and interesting for other people. But yeah, it feels very different from my other books, and it feels like quite a risk being so personal and quite exposing. But it's also been extremely cathartic, and I've been very well kind of looked after by my agent and editors, and I think it's early motherhood, aspects of the maternal experience are so underwritten, and it felt quite frightening to write in a way that I knew that would be published. But actually the experience of that block, and that I felt like I had to like slay the angel of the house every day before I sat down to work, and I was kind of interested in that I felt so much pressure against me, that it was, the voices were, like, this isn't a thing, like, that no one needs to know this stuff, or this is domestic, this isn't real intellectual work, and I felt I was kind of like egged on almost by that. Those kind of that sense. I thought there's something really interesting in here. I'm having this like feeling that I shouldn't be writing this, and where's that coming from? So yeah, I mean, it's only just come out, so
and I think often the best writing does take some kind of risk, whether it's emotional or intellectual or artistic, and I think it's really paid off. I really appreciate your description and celebration of all the skills involved in looking after young children, which, as well as being sometimes boring and difficult, can be creative. And perhaps now you would read another section from the chapter. I love the title of this chapter. What's it called? Care work and creativity in late stage capitalism.
Yeah, sure, thank you. Okay. My children demanded new ways of being: silliness, cuddles, repetition, echoes. Some of it was painful and boring, some of it was magical. Spontaneity and surprise were key attributes of these babies' employees. That's me. They had no time for self-doubt. They were exactly who they wanted to be. They wanted to move. They wanted to dance, to touch, to laugh. They needed me to be in the present and give them a stream of immediate experiences. And so I fell in love with the world again. Have you seen the shape of water as it is being poured? Have you let a bumblebee's spun sugar legs walk across your palm? Have you tried to say 2 words at the same time? Have you seen the opalescence of a bubble? Have you watched a slug slither? Have you tried to feel the planet moving? I was paid with kisses and heavenly bodies, with gallons of dopamine and canisters of oxytocin, with koans and drawings and beauty. I live now with Marilyn Monroe and James Dean. I was paid with the signature sound of their laughter and rat-a-tat giggles. They showed me how life could encompass play. I had lost touch with how it felt to be in a body, to horse around, to live through the senses. My creativity for the sake of it had gone underground, but they unearthed it. They taught me how to glory in the simple pleasures of being a sensuous creature alive on earth. Children live in the moment, outside the marketplace. Their days are a constant remaking and creating and shedding and imagining. They invent words and questions and ideas I couldn't dream of. Their minds overflow with ideas and possibilities. They cherish the world. They cherish being alive. The tension between this work and my earning work was high. I realized I had been molded into a loyal, obedient earner, addicted to acquisition and the external metrics of success. Increasingly, though, I was trying to find a path towards a new way of caring, a radical way, an authentic way, beyond the martyred maternal ideal. I wanted to start recovering from my indoctrination and hyper-consumerism and turbo-capitalism, from the Enlightenment values of conquest and mastery and domination that I feel and resent in my cellular being, and step out of the value system that placed capital and goods accumulation way too high.
Thank you. Totally love that section. So many interesting ideas and beauty. And when you talk about stepping outside of the current value system, just wonder if you have any ideas for how that works in practice. Like, what kind of things have you discovered? And
well, yeah, it's a really good question. It's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, probably like spending as much time in the woods as I can. Not that that's enough, to be honest. I think it's very hard. I think I probably like wrote that section or was thinking about that section a lot when COVID, we were in lockdowns, and my husband lost his job and we were both at home looking after the children together. And so I was with kind of another adult, and I had some self-employment grants. And for the first time in my like experience of motherhood, although it was hard in lots of different ways, there was a sense of I was actually less lonely, and I was kind of, because of the self-employment grants, which kind of gave me a sense of what it might be like to have a kind of care wage or a basic income. It took away that and like kind of, you know, the financial imperative, and it was quite kind of idyllic and utopian for a little while, but then, you know, we tried to both work part-time, we tried to share it, but it's pretty impossible with, you know, needing to earn and so on. I'm working on it, Amy, and I'd love to hear anyone else or anyone else has found. I guess, I think, you know, and I've written about this in my other books, for me, spending time, you know, with other beings, you know, with things becoming other things, and, you know, in the natural world, you know, it's free. Well, you know, it's complicated, but I feel like that's a value that I have that I want to pass on to my kids, that they can, you know, that, you know, something like spending time, you know, outside and in the woods, it doesn't have to cost any money, and that's a kind of like to capitalism, you know.
Mm-hmm. And you also talk about community and sharing with other mothers, and you know what we're doing now, for example, and what you're doing with that book, and you found value in community.
I took me a while to feel that I could open up to people in how I was feeling in my matrescence, and I just felt very, until I kind of discovered the word matrescence and started reading, you know, Adrienne Rich was big for me, of Woman Born, and her concept of the institution of motherhood compared with the experience of motherhood. So you kind of delineated between the two, and I found that was really helpful because it kind of gave me permission to talk about the institution of modern motherhood. And you know, because I guess like I think a lot of it for me in the beginning was like, I, you know, had this baby that I so loved, and I didn't want anyone to think if I said I was struggling that I didn't love her, I was complaining. You know, it felt so kind of like difficult and taboo. But you know, the more I read and the more I realized that, you know, the conditions of modern motherhood are very strange that we're living in, and very cruel, I think, for women in different ways. But
you talk about the pressure that you feel that you felt because of the idea of intensive motherhood, and how that plays out and often can create something of an identity crisis.
Yeah, so I found that phrasing really helpful too. So intensive motherhood was a phrase coined in the 90s by Sharon Hayes, and it's been really developed by a number of academics, including Andrea O'Reilly and others. And it means the imperative of modern motherhood in most kind of Western cultures to you know, spend a lot of time, resources, emotional intelligence, enjoy it, be there all the time, very present. You know, kind of what it says on the tin, it's also called total motherhood, or kind of immersive mothering is how I think Dr. Sears called it. And I found it, what I found was that was very much in me, the sense that like, though, you know, when my baby was 9 months and my maternity leave payment stops, I would need to earn. I also felt that I had to be very present all the time, like, you know about child development, child psychology. I was very scared about messing things up. And it was really useful to me to do the research for the book to kind of unpick where these ideas have come from. And on the one hand, you know, it's great, we know a lot more about children and psychology and attachment, and you know what kids need, and how to talk to children in a different way, and how to treat children in a different way. But at the same time, it seems like in our kind of post-Bowlby, kind of post-attachment theory society, we have left out and forgotten what Bowlby really said, which is that a mother can't do it alone, a parent can't do it alone. They need society, they need community around them. You know, it's bonkers to think that that's possible, but we seem to have in the kind of a lot of the discourse and a lot of the books that I was reading at the beginning, you know, it's all put on the mother still today. And perhaps that is changing, but I think that that was very helpful in kind of, you know, seeing it for what it was. And so much of this experience was trying to see, you know, realizing how kind of occluded so much of the maternal experience is, and how, you know, I think for the first time I understood myself as a truly ecological being that had been kind of infected by a lot of social ideas that I needed to root out. And that was kind of interesting too. But it's very tricky. I write about kind of gentle parenting, respectful parenting, and that movement, and you know, it's very, very seductive. You want to be all those things, but it seems to me that so many mothers I know, and I did a kind of little data survey for the book, are really struggling, are really stressed, are really burnt out, are really finding it difficult to do everything, and it needs to change.
Yeah, a lot of these ideas have a well-meaning basis, but in practice, without support, are very hard to enact. And yeah, I just felt on the book like you were just a very conscientious mum, you know, wanting to do everything right, and that's but it was almost impossible to, you know, you can't do it all right. So we are getting quite a few audience questions coming in. I've got other things I'd like to ask you, but I'm just thinking that I will jump onto some audience questions. So we've got one saying, the chapter about how cells are exchanged between mother and baby is amazing. Can you explain that for the audience?
Yeah, sure, thank you. Yeah, so this is the area of microchimerism, and I got interested in it because when my daughter was born, I really felt that she hadn't completely left my body, that kind of my attention was different, and that there was something going on that wasn't what I'd been told, that, I don't know, there was a kind of enmeshment or something. And I started to read about the research that had been done, and particularly by Diana Bianchi and Amy Body has done a lot of work around it, that shows that the cells from the fetus cross the placenta into the mother's body, and after the baby is born, those cells remain in the mother's body, and there's an exchange. We don't know much about the other way around. And these cells of the fetus have been found in women in multiple areas of the body, all kind of organs, lungs, heart, brain, and they don't know really exactly why. So it could be that they're neutral, just a kind of byproduct of the fetus and then the exit. It could be a negative thing, so they've been found at sites of lung cancer, but they could also be positive, so they could be at the site of lung cancer to be helping repair. There's one theory that, you know, they could be in the breasts and the brain to kind of help with lactation or attachment, bonding, and so on. So, you know, it's quite early days, but Amy Body, one of the biologists who studies in this area, compared it to me with like the science of the microbiome, and how 10 years ago people were like, it's a big deal, but we don't really know about it. And she kind of said that's where we're at now. You know, we know that these cells are doing something, and they probably are helping survival in some way, maybe, but we don't exactly know yet. She calls them zombie cells, which are, you know, this idea that they, you know, sometimes I think she got really interested in it in her second pregnancy, which similarly to mine seemed to extract a lot more than from her, and the idea of maternal fetal conflict, and that, you know, sometimes, I mean, you know, I feel like sometimes with my children today that they want more than the mother can give. There's kind of this sense that they can extract. Anyway, it's not a science fiction film, it's real life.
Yeah, so interesting to be at the forefront of probably ideas that we'll hear more about, and also for the science to kind of confirm something that you were experiencing or feeling kind of instinctively, that something's going on here. You know, I'm still actually physically connected to this child, and also the idea that just because something's natural doesn't mean it's necessarily good for you. You know, all the things about the cells being injury sites, or all really interesting stuff. And to carry on with some of the cutting edge science, she touches on quantum biology in the book. Can she tell us how that helped her insights and developed her thinking?
Yeah, so I guess that was, so I was kind of trying to search everywhere for clues to try and make sense of this experience that I felt to be so kind of weird and interesting, so disavowed. And I was spending quite a lot of time looking for tardigrades with my microscope. So tardigrades are microscopic animals. They're sometimes called water bears or moss piglets. Another thing for you all to look up afterwards. They look like a cross between like a manatee, a pig, and a Hoover bag. They're amazing. And I was kind of drawn to them because they are very resilient, and they are very tiny and hidden again. But also I found one in some moss and looked at it, and it was just amazing to see one up close in my microscope. But also I'd read that one had supposedly been quantum entangled. Some researchers had claimed to have done that. I don't really understand quantum stuff. Like I think Einstein call it, I can't even remember what, no, there was a phrase, spooky happenings over there or something. But there's something in my my mind that even that there was something about how kind of hard it was to kind of understand, to get my head around, which seemed to mimic a lot of my experience of early motherhood, like looking after a baby and why I felt so weird. But also there was some interesting new research about how quantum could be involved in things like photosynthesis, and it seemed to me like a symbol of a force or a happening that is probably much more involved in things that we that more than we realize, but our human minds can't quite comprehend. So even though I'm kind of embarrassed because I can't, I'm not a physicist and I can't explain it, almost that's the point. Like it kind of felt, I have this, we know so little about the world around us, but we think we really do, and we think we're kind of on top and in charge, and that it's our right to control everything. And I like the quantum stuff because it kind of suggests that we might benefit from kind of taking a step back and being a bit more humble as humans.
Yeah, I don't think anyone can really understand quantum stuff. That's kind of the point. It's on another level. Although I did this quote that you've got at the beginning of that chapter about 21st century biology is fundamentally different from 20th century biology. It's a biology of relationships rather than entities. I found that a sort of interesting way into thinking about a lot of the things that you're talking about.
Yeah,
the interconnection of matter.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, the kind of probably the overriding theme of the book is like interdependence and interconnectedness, and how we're so focused on the baby and the infant, but there's no, that it's an environment, and it's the mother or the birthing parent, or that it's it just feels like it's so occluded, the work of maternal, and I find that kind of spectacular and fascinating.
I have another question from the audience. After my baby was born almost 4 months ago, congratulations, several older women in my life said, if we knew how hard it would be, no one would do it, in response to my shock at the continual pain and bleeding while recovering. There was also so many comments of, but it's all worth it. In the immediate aftermath, bleeding and afraid, I felt that comment invalidated what I had just experienced. How, the comment about, but it's all worth it, I think, how can we talk about the gore and pain to pregnant women without making them even more afraid of birth?
What a great question. And yeah, I'm so sorry that you've had so much pain, and congratulations. And I've absolutely, it resonates so much. I found those comments really difficult and invalidating. I think like people forget. I think like sleep deprivation must make people kind of forget. It's a great question, and it's one that I'm thinking about a lot at the moment, and I don't really know. I think it's really very difficult because I think it is so well intentioned to protect someone in their pregnancy. And I know that certainly I didn't want to hear things in my own. I think it probably is partly the job of better information just simply given to people in antenatal appointments, and I think there could be just a kind of, you know, a much more respectful giving of the possibilities of you know, what can happen, what postpartum recovery can look like, you know, kind of stripped from any, I feel like, you know, delivering that information in a neutral, and I this could be completely idealistic, and I really acknowledge how difficult it is for healthcare providers and people, but there has to be a way of improving things. In the book I talk about, there's a statistic of a postpartum, a big postpartum health book, and I think it's from the States, and like something like 0.01% is spent on like physical recovery for women, and something like that, you know. And there's lots more books now about recovery, but like I didn't know, for example, that I would bleed for a really long time. I didn't know about birth injuries and what that can mean for a person, and I talked to a consultant gynecologist about it, and you know, she's done lots of work and loads of work, amazing work, and surveys and talking to women, and she said to me, women want to know. So
I discovered after giving birth that something like 80% of first-time births will cause some kind of tear or birth injury. So that's by far the most likely thing that's going to happen. And I think just for that information to be told neutrally, so you're able to prepare for that, and more focus on the postpartum period for the woman. I think I would have been helpful, definitely. What are your thoughts on postnatal depression? Is it possible that rather being internal and individual, that it might, at least in part, be born from a society that fails to acknowledge matrescence? And as you say, the deception around so many parts of pregnancy and the postnatal period. About
really good question. I don't know if you can hear my 3 children fighting.
Mine have just come in the door as well, actually, appropriately.
Would you mind repeating the question?
It's about postnatal depression and whether it might be from society rather than an individual, the causes.
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the questions that I wanted to try and answer was, you know, how much of maternal mental illness and maternal health problems could be prevented through a better society, which is a kind of impossible question to answer. And I talked to a scientist called Lisa Galia from the States, and you know, she talked to me about, you know, how seismic and huge the hormonal changes are in pregnancy. You know, some hormones changing 200, 300, 1,000 times, hormones that we've never experienced before, hormones that don't even have a name, some we probably don't even know yet. You know, and she said to me, like, because of this, then this kind of withdrawal of those hormones dropping after birth, you know, there is going to be some level of you know, mental illness and great vulnerability with that. So, you know, there's certainly a kind of you know, a clinical, medical, you know, thing, physiological happening. But saying that, I think that we, you know, I was given a diagnosis of postnatal depression, and I was treated with antidepressants first off, and then therapy. And kind of as the years went on, I did think, how, looking at how we treat women who are becoming mothers, and how society is, very hostile, and just in terms of the everyday, like public places or transport, you can't take a buggy onto a train, or child austerity and neoliberalism has just like decimated community, and children's centres and Sure Start centres all closed down, etc. To the fact that healthcare is not adequately invested in. We've got this huge maternity crisis. There's all these social and structural issues which are frankly, appalling. And if could it be better? Could there be less mental health problems? I mean, we know that there is like a rate kind of globally postnatal depression. It happens. But as the great neuroscientist Jodie Pulaski said to me, social support really helps. We know that social support can really impact on people struggling and so on. So I mean, I would say we need a kind of biopsychosocial, more holistic model, and that motherhood today clashes like so intensely with hyper individualism and kind of predatory capitalism, and that there are big issues in how we think about the world, how we devalue caregiving and neglect caregivers, and we don't want to be seen as vulnerable or weak. So yeah, that's a long answer.
Thank you. This might be the last question from the audience. Lucy, thank you so much for writing this book. I feel so very seen and validated by this conversation, and I cannot wait to read the book. I wondered when the matrescence period ends, and whether there is much research into the period after early parenting, and whether the physiological and psychological changes are permanent.
Yeah, great question. So it's really exciting, this cutting edge field of the parental brain, because they're all publishing kind of it's really happening right now, and essentially what we seem to know is that the changes definitely last for kind of 6 years, and probably much longer. The brain seems to wax and wane. It seems to kind of change through motherhood. Also, I mean, we haven't mentioned this, but quickly, like the caregiver brain, so the paternal brain, or adoptive parents or mothers who haven't been pregnant, we're finding that, of course, we're all born with the circuitry in the brains to be able to deliver caregiving, and those brains also change hugely and shape and so on. I would say there's no like hard fast definition of matrescence. I imagine, my daughter's nearly 7, so it's quite early for me, but I imagine matrescence probably continues in different ways through the life course. And that maybe perhaps every child is a matrescence. For me, the initial matrescence was the most kind of shocking and changing, but I think there's a lot more that we will learn, and the main thing is that it's a big deal for women, and we should allow that and acknowledge it.
All right. Thank you so much. There's many more things I would like to talk to you about, but we're going to have to wrap up. I just want to say that I'm so impressed that you wrote this book while having 3 young children, the youngest of which is still a little toddler. And it's a terrific book, which I urge everyone to read. So I think we're at the end now. Thank you so much, Lucy Jones.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Lucy, Amy, thank you so much for such an amazing and candid conversation, and for giving our audience so much to think about. We really appreciate that, and thank you all for your questions too. And please do take a look at 5by15's website to see information about our upcoming events. We have a conversation with Alok Jha and Tim Smedley on this coming Thursday at 7 o'clock about solving the world's water crisis, and you can find all the information at 5by15.com. Lucy and Amy, thank you so much again, and good night.
Thank you, everyone.